I'm not a boomer. I'm a member of Gen X. Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to a video which has nothing to do with books. From time to time I make videos on political topics. This is probably the most economic video that I have ever made because I just feel like there's a really simple economic reason which explains why there seems to be such a gap between the values and ideas, particularly when it comes to work and career. That gap between my generation, Gen X, and boomers, and millennials and Gen Z people. And that economic reason is really simple and really easy to illustrate. So, a lot of people my age and older seem to feel like that the current generation, the millennials and Gen Z, are somehow weaker, less motivated, lazier, less wise than we were at their age or that we are now. And the simple truth of the matter is that is inherently unfair, and it is incredibly untrue. From just a basic point of view, the world in which young people today live is different from the world in which we lived when we were 20, we were in our 20s, when we were in our late teens, etc. Even when we were in our 30s, things have really changed. And as a result of that change, quite naturally, I think people almost instinctively and naturally respond to changes in ways which actually kind of make sense. Okay, I'm suggesting there is a kind of survivalist logic to what's going on and what's happening right now. So, as a preference, I like young people. I like millennials and Gen Z. I have a child who fits in each one of those groups. Okay, I think they're great. I think they're creative. I think they're interesting. I think they are iconoclastic in the sense that they are willing to break down and get rid of and discard the old ideas that don't work. In a sense, I think today's generations are probably more likely to bring about actual change to structural things in the United States than the hippies were in the 1960s and 1970s. And the reason for that is to a certain extent economically, they don't get to benefit from the same things that the hippies of the 1960s and 1970s and my generation got to benefit from. So there was a really basic economic change that took place in 1980, which I want to talk about here in just a minute, which I'll illustrate with two charts. Before I do that, I need to introduce some basic economic concepts. I used to teach economics, believe it or not, in high school. I taught, basic intro economics in high school to high school seniors for, 10, 15, 16 years. So I have a pretty basic understanding of economics. And to be honest with you, I think once you get really deeply involved in economics, you kind of lose sight of the practical realities of how economics actually works. So the first economic concept I want to introduce you to is the concept of scarcity. This is the most simple of all economic concepts, and it's the concept upon which every other economic concept is based. All resources are scarce in the sense that all resources have a defined amount. Even sand on the beach, there's a defined amount of sand on the beach. Is there a lot of it? Yes. Oil, there's a defined amount of oil. Diamonds, there's a defined amount of diamond, etc. Okay, so all resources are scarce. Well, one resource is capital, and capital is just a fancy economic way of saying, essentially money or things that can be turned into money easily because they are liquid assets that you could turn into money relatively quickly. So that kind of capital is also a resource. So that means that wealth, money, capital are in fact scarce. You need to keep that in mind. It'll be important as we move forward. A second thing to keep in mind is about how wealth is accumulated by people. And it's accumulated by people over time. If you're like me and you're a Gen Xer, you probably started off making an entry-level amount of money at whatever job it is you took. I started off as a teacher. My starting teacher salary was $20,100 a year. Okay, that's what I started making in 1989, 1990 when I started teaching. Okay, that was an entry-level salary. And as I progressed through my profession, my salary increased. The amount of money I made increased. The amount of opportunities I had to make money because of what I did increased. And I accumulated wealth over the course of my life. That wealth allowed me to make investments, which, have provided me or generated income and retirement income for me. And they also allowed me to buy a home. Actually, I live in the second home my wife and I bought together. And that is the major repository of most of our wealth, is this home that we are sitting in right now. That is my number one asset. And that has been true for generations of Americans. Home ownership has been a dream and a way of accumulating and advancing a person's wealth over the course of their lifetime. Okay, so that is an incredibly important thing. Now, if you can already kind of see where I'm going, I think here, because that today is increasingly difficult for young people to be able to afford a home. Home costs, mortgages, interest rates are really high. In part, this has to do with private equity firms buying up houses and real estate as an investment, which raises their prices, makes them more scarce, makes them more valuable, makes them harder for young people to be able to afford. Keep that in mind also, because it's also kind of part of what I want to talk about here. Okay, so in the 1960s, I believe John F. Kennedy suggested that one reason for promoting and doing things to help people who are not making a lot of money is that would create economic growth, and a rising tide, I believe he said, lifts all boats. In other words, as the economy grows, everybody does better. People don't become rich because the economy grows, but their poverty becomes more bearable. And poverty is redefined as something not as bad as it was before. A rising tide lifts all boats. This is an important economic concept, and it's something that here in the United States of America, we believed in up until 1980. In 1980, we elected Ronald Reagan president of the United States, and in 1981, he began instituting what at the time was called supply-side economic policy, and which was derogatively referred to and accurately referred to as trickle-down economics. And the idea was that if you cut taxes for wealthy corporations, cut the taxes for the people at the top, they would use that money and invest in a way which created economic growth or created a better economy for everybody. That's the idea behind it. And so what we got with Reagan was massive tax cuts for the wealthy. Tax cuts for the wealthiest people in the United States of America declined dramatically. It's not that there weren't tax savings for other people, particularly, middle class and upper middle class people. There were, but the biggest tax cuts went to the wealthiest. Okay, that idea was repeated by George W. Bush when he was elected president in 2001, and was repeated by Donald Trump when he was elected president, or became president in 2017. They cut taxes for the people at the top. They reduced regulations for corporations. In other words, they gave the people at the top much more money, and the idea is that it's supposed to create an economic growth in which we see a rising tide lift all boats. Now I'm going to show you two graphs. Okay, this is the first graph, which shows income. And rising income levels from about 1979 till, I believe the chart, I can't see it right now because it's on my phone, I believe the chart ends around 2017, maybe 2019. Notice that the wealthiest have been accumulating and making far more money, and making money at a much higher rate than everyone else. Okay, particularly as you go down, this doesn't have all the quintiles on it. Particularly as you go down, you'll notice that, the incomes for people at the bottom have not gone up at all, while incomes for people at the top have gone up hundreds of percentage points. Okay, that translates into what we see on this graph, which is how much of the nation's wealth and how increasingly the nation's wealth is owned by the people at the very top. Now remember that concept of scarcity. If people at the very top, the top 1%, the top 5%, the top 10%, control vast amounts of wealth, the vast majority of the wealth in the United States of America, that leaves less for everybody else. So guess what that means? That means young people have fewer opportunities to accumulate wealth over the course of their lifetime, because so much of the wealth is held by those who already have wealth. And how do the wealthy hold on to power? The wealthy hold on to power by using part of their money to influence politicians to pass policies which protect the wealth of the wealthy. And as a result, the rich get richer and the wealthy accumulate more wealth, and there's less for everybody else. So we're seeing the effects of that gap between rich and poor right now, and young people are feeling it and responding to it. What it means is that a college education no longer guarantees you advancing through middle class. from lower middle class to upper middle class. What it means is that buying a home is less and less possible for young people because they can't afford home prices because they're too high. They can't afford the interest rates because they're too high, in part because the wealthy are accumulating more wealth by buying homes and driving up the price of them and driving up the value of them. What it means is that young people who go to work in corporate jobs realize really quickly that they are expected to do a massive amount of work for very little increases in pay, and their opportunities are limited. It's not that there are no opportunities. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there are no opportunities. I'm saying there are less opportunities. And if your opportunities to succeed under the current system are not there, then you do one of two things. You either bring the system down and change it, or you change your goals. You change what you want. So, no longer we increasingly see young people who are not motivated by money, who are not motivated by perhaps owning property, or not motivated by, working hard and being that really valuable employee who, the boss promotes, and because those things just don't happen. What we see now in the corporate workplace is the person who works hardest and does all those things gets more responsibility and more work, not necessarily more pay. And young people are naturally responding against that. They have less opportunity to get their hands on wealth, therefore they are less motivated by wealth, therefore they are less driven on the job, and they see a job as exactly what it is, and that is a way to pay and to make their lives possible. And if that job can't make their lives possible in a way which means that they're increasing in wealth and increasing accumulating and being able to buy a home, then they're just going to give up on the system, and they're just going to work in a way in which people in my generation and boomers claim we don't understand, because we were all taught work hard, advance, be there for early, be the first person at work, take on new responsibilities, and you'll be rewarded. That no longer is true. Now, whose fault is it that that's no longer true? Our fault. It's Gen X's fault. It's the boomer generation's fault that that's no longer true. We created the situation in which young people find themselves by voting the way we did and by supporting policies that we supported, which may have benefited us but are not benefiting young people. If we want to change that, we have to do things that increase the stake that young people see in the current system. We have to support policies that will benefit young people in ways that, we were benefited by the system that existed during our time period. So stop blaming young people for the problems or for all the things. Stop picking on them as being lazy or unmotivated or, not committed or not really believing in the American system. If they don't feel like they have a stake in the system, there's a reason. And the reason was created not by them, but by us. Anyway, there you go. Look forward to your comments in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching.